Am I on now? There you go. Glad to have you guys with us. Hey, if you're checking us out for the first time in-house, thank you so much for being here. We are honored. Look under your seat and see if there's that key to that new Porsche. Just kidding. All right, just seeing if you're paying attention or if you've already tuned us out. If you're checking us out online, thanks for tuning in. Listen, we know you're at the beach. There's lots of things you could be doing, but you chose to be here, and we are honored, and we hope that you know how much of an honored guest you are here. Hey, we're beginning a new series today, and it's a series called I Love Jesus, but I Like to Get Even a Little. We thought about naming it, Mean Girls, but that was already taken. And we thought about naming it, Bad People. But, you don't really want to call people bad, even though sometimes people will, you ever heard that phrase, well, he's really not a bad person. He just does a lot of bad stuff. A lot. Or like you see that interview on TV where, it's like the guy's mom or it's like a friend, a neighbor, and they're like, he was such a quiet guy. He's so sweet. And I'm like, I don't think your definition of sweet and my definition of sweet are the same thing. I mean, he's an axe-murderer. I mean, how sweet could he be, right? So, but we wanted to get away from calling people bad people, and we didn't want to say, I really want to throat punch this person, but Jesus probably wouldn't like it. That title's way too long, too. So we didn't want to do that to you, but we all have this, and let me throw this out as a disclaimer before we get into this, because I think this is really important. We're not trying to single anybody out, because, we love people, and we want the whole premise of how we preach here sometimes and how we teach is that we want to become better people, right? We know that life is better with Jesus is one of the things that we preach and we teach all the time, and that you do life better with Jesus. So that's not to say that we don't have our moments ourselves, right? Testify. Not a lot of testifying here, but all right, testifying. Oh, you're talking about, my wife's saying for me. Yeah, I'm difficult sometimes. But, we always, it's not to say that we're not mean sometimes or that we can't be mean-spirited. But what I'm talking about, what we're going to talk about for the next couple of weeks, this week and next week, is there are certain type of people in our life that are just difficult people. They're either narcissistic or they're mean-spirited. They're hard to get along with. They're users. They're manipulators. They have a tendency to want to try to manipulate your time, manipulate your money, manipulate your children. Whatever the case may be, sometimes we run into difficult people, and the question becomes this: how do you deal with that? How do you deal as trying to live a Christian life, right? Trying to follow the words of Jesus. How do you deal with difficult people in your life? And I'm not just talking about people you run into casually or you may just encounter them one time. I'm talking about people that you see all the time. You work with them. You go to school with them. You may live with them. No, I'm just kidding. You may see them at Thanksgiving and Christmas. I don't know, but you know who I'm talking about. Because listen, there's probably somebody that comes to each of our minds when we say, there's a difficult person in your life, and you go, oh yeah, I got one of those. Yeah. But the bad thing is this: there may be somebody that hears this message that thinks of you. All right? So here's the thing. None of us are immune from it. But the problem with difficult people, the problem with manipulative people, the problem with people that are users and that are narcissistic people is this: that if we're not careful and we're not almost proactive, meaning this, you have to know what you're going to do before it happens. All right, there are some decisions in your life, young people, if you're in here, you need to make the decision about sex before marriage before you're in the backseat of a Buick. All right, there are some things you need to be proactive about, right, that you need to say, when this situation arises, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to do A, B, and then C. All right? Or I know what I'm going to do this. Well, it's the same thing when we talk about difficult people, because if we don't know what we're going to do, if we don't think it through, then this is what happens. Manipulative people, difficult people, they gain a certain measure of control over our lives. You run into a difficult person, and before you know it, you're not even acting like yourself anymore. You're like, oh, okay, it's on. Oh, you gonna treat me like that? We'll see. And then you're sitting there, you're thinking, I can't believe I just said that. I can't believe I just did that. I can't believe, it's because what happens is, there's almost this place in our lives to where they throw us off balance, don't they? When you know you have to deal with that person, when you see them coming, you almost want to turn around and go the other way because you're like, oh man, here it goes again. And they just like, they move to the left, you kind of shift to the right, they throw you off balance, and you just don't know sometimes how you're going to handle the situation at hand, and it almost makes you become somebody totally different if you're not careful. Because they have a certain measure of control over our lives if we're not proactive. I'll give you a short, but it's going to be a long illustration. We went through this a couple of years ago. Hannah was going to school, and she came home one day crying. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and tell y'all something, all right? There are two things that men, ladies, this is something you need to probably file away. There's two things that men can't stand, and they absolutely hate, all right? Husbands, dads, just men in general. The first one is to see their wife cry. Sorry? Meaning this, like, and this is like if you're in an argument, ladies, crying is unfair. And it's just... That's so not fair. It's like, it reminds me of that line of Tom Hanks in A League of Their Own when he goes, there's no crying in baseball, right? I mean, there should be a rule, no crying in arguing, especially if you're losing. All right, you can't start crying all of a sudden because guys hate that, and most guys will do this. Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm sorry for, but I'm just sorry. I'm sorry. Just stop crying, right? All right, so that's one of the things. The second thing, guys, help me out here. The second thing that guys hate is to see their daughters cry or their kids cry, especially their daughters. There's like a primal switch in every man when they see their daughters crying that flips on. It's like lights come on, adrenaline starts pumping, nostrils flare, you start to get jacked up, you start having dark thoughts about humanity, you're like, whoever made my baby cry, I'm getting ready to make them cry. I don't care if he is in 4th grade. I don't care. I don't even care. Where is he? Well, it seems like Hannah, she came home crying, so, I'm like, what's the matter? Well, it seems like this kid was picking on her, and this boy was like, the picking had become bullying. And so we went kind of round and round and round with the school, and we would have meetings, and you're just at this point to where you want to do something, but you don't really know exactly what to do because you want to take control of it, but you want to handle it in a way that's the correct way to handle it. So we would meet with the principal, we would meet with the teachers, and then they would go round and round. They'd call the boy into the office, and things would seem to settle down, but then it would just, all of a sudden, it would start to escalate again. Then it really started to escalate, and it wasn't just Hannah. It was a number of different kids that this kid was kind of singling out. So, and listen, I'm not trying to make this little boy out to be, I'm going to call him Derek to protect the innocent. I'm not trying to make him out to be a terrible kid or a bad kid, okay? I don't really believe that. It was just, they were just having some behavioral problems with him, and it was just kind of coming out. So it went round and round, escalated. And you can imagine as a parent, if you're sitting out there as a parent, what you would do. right? What would you do? What would be your response? How would you handle it? And there are some of you out there, you go, I know what I'd do, man. I'd blow up in that school, man. I'd be like, taking prisoners. But you can't necessarily handle it that way. So the boy got suspended, but then he would come back to school, and every time we either dropped Hannah off or picked her up, it was like we lived on a roulette wheel. You just didn't know from day to day what you were going to get. And it was just a really, really difficult time. Well, you can imagine how you would handle it or anything. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, this is how, we talk about how difficult people throw us off balance. We had some dark thoughts. I mean, I'm not proud to say that, I'm a pastor, so there was this thought, and it was all Lisa's idea, of hiring a couple of 8th grade boys to meet this kid out on the playground, No, I'm just kidding. It was really my fault. It was my fault, not hers. But, you think about stuff like that, and you're like, that's not right. I mean, I can't do that. And then you go, or can I? I mean, so, you're kind of, it makes you, they gain a certain amount of control over your life, and they throw you off balance. It was like little Derek had moved into our house. Because every day the conversation would go something like this. Did you hear anything from the school today? No, I didn't hear anything. Did Hannah have a good day? Well, she seems to have a good, well, I mean, we don't. So it got to the point where it was disrupting our whole schedule. I mean, there were times to where we were like, do we need to go sit in the classroom with her? Do we need to go do this? I mean, what do you need to do? But we've all done this, okay? And I'm going to tell you how this ended. I'm going to tell you how this ended, okay? And I'm going to tell you how we resolved it next week. You'll be back next week because you want to know, don't you? But this is what happens with difficult people, right? And here's something else that happens to them. Not only do they gain a measure of control over our lives, and not only do they not only do they throw us off balance, but we have a tendency to overcompensate sometimes, don't we? Meaning that we're frustrated with our boss, or we're frustrated with our ex-wife, or we're frustrated with our ex-husband. Lord. Man, that was, whew. Hit a nerve. So, here's the thing. When that happens, we have a tendency to not necessarily take it out on that person because that person may be like untouchable or like you can't get to them. So you take it out on your coworkers, or you take it out on your classmates, or you take it out on your parents, or you take it out on your children. So what happens is we end up overcompensating sometimes because what really happens is we're frustrated with these difficult people in our lives, and we don't really want to take it out on them, or we can't take it out on them for a particular time. And if you're not careful, here's the thing that we end up doing, right? And this is what we did. I don't know how you guys handle your stuff, but these are 3 ways you can handle it. The first way was this. We told Hannah, we'll just ignore him. Right? You ever told your kids that? Listen, he's a bully, or you just need to ignore him. Well, how much does that work in your life when you're like, just ignore them? Because when you try to ignore them, here's what happens. They just keep chipping away and chipping away and chipping away and chipping away. And you're like, I'm getting ready to lay hands on this person, man. And it ain't going to be like hands of prayer. It's going to be like, but it just, so ignoring them doesn't work for us at all, because we try to get to this point to where, just ignore them, that they'll move on to somebody else. Well, it's easy for us to say that as parents, but Hannah was living it every day. So it was a lot more difficult for her. And then the next thing, and this is just the dad, all right, just being honest, this is just the dad. I'm like, I'm just going to teach you how to throat punch him. I mean, And then I'd go, oh, you can't do that, Scott. You're a pastor. You can't have your daughter throat punching people in school. I mean, or can you? So it's like, because here's the thing. Because getting even with them just puts you even with somebody that you don't like. Right? And my grandma used to say this. I used to hate it when she would say this. And then she usually said it after we had gotten in a fight, but so we said, okay. But she'd say, you can't stoop to their level. And I'd say, what if I like their level? But you can't because, and then there's a third option. And the third option is not intuitive. Matter of fact, it's counterintuitive. But the third option is the option, in the end, that protects your heart. And it guards your heart. And it frees you up from difficult people in your life. And Jesus talked about it all the time. Jesus mentioned it all the time. But there's a really cool story that we find in the Old Testament that really mirrors this whole principle that we're talking about. And it comes from the most unlikely of characters. It is a lady who we're introduced to because she intersects with the life of David. And David at this particular time, David is a fugitive. All right, now I don't know how much you grew up knowing about David in Sunday school about him killing Goliath, but what had happened at this particular time is that he's not a king yet, and he's not a shepherd boy yet. You guys know the story about David and how he killed Goliath. Well, what happens is David ends up being a national hero. I mean, he's growing in epic proportions. At this particular time, there is a king of Israel called Saul. And Saul, he sees that David, he's there when David kills Goliath. He knows that David's star is rising. I mean, David's a go-getter. He's a leader. He's an up-and-comer. And Saul realizes it's better to have David close to me than far away from me. Because it's good for business. Because people love David and people love Saul. So it's good for business if David's with me. The problem becomes for Saul, that David's popularity is growing and growing and growing to the point to where they're singing songs about David. They're saying, Saul's killed 1,000, but David's killed 10,000. And so David's popularity is growing. Well, that becomes a problem for Saul. And so what happens with Saul in this particular, in what's going on here, is that Saul, he tries to kill David. And so David ends up, of course, being on the run. And David's a fugitive at this particular time when this story takes place. Now what happens is, David, he attracts all these other men that have gone through not the exact same situation, but they've been dissed by Saul too. And so his numbers start to grow. And so there's this whole little miniature army of about 600 guys that are all running around through the wilderness, and they're just trying to make do, and they're trying to stay clear of Saul. So David has this angst that's already beneath the surface that he has with Saul. You see that? I want you to see this. He has this angst that's going on. And then David runs into this next character. And this is where we kind of pick up the story. But David's a fugitive from justice. I'm not justice, but just a fugitive right now because he is trying to stay away from Saul. Because Saul realizes this, that not only is it bad for Saul's dynasty, all right, not only is it bad for his kingship, but he wants his son, Jonathan, to take his place. And with David's star rising, that won't happen. So now David's messing with his dynasty. So this is why Saul is very intent on hunting David down. And this is where our story picks up. A certain man in Moab who had property there at Carmel. Now, if you had property in ancient times, you were wealthy. Okay? Was very wealthy. There you go. He had 1,000 goats. Bah. Right? Now, this means nothing to you and I. We're like, who would want 1,000 goats? Right? But imagine it like this. He's got a garage full of cars. He's got his everyday driver. He's got his, I like to play around in my Jeep car. Then he's got a classic, a muscle hot rod, probably a 68 Camaro. That's what I'm talking about. And then he's got like a lake house, So, okay, man, all right. So he's not on the market, ladies, all right? It's a story about 1,000 some years ago, okay? So he has 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. Now, this doesn't mean anything to us, but this would be the equivalent, okay, of what you would say. This is when he finds how much more wealthier he's gotten. This is like an annual report. This is a fiscal report where he's bringing in all of his sheep and he's saying, okay, let's see how many sheep survived. And then what we're going to do is we're going to shear them. It's usually probably happening about springtime because they want to cut their coats down so that they're cool for the summers and so that they can grow another coat that they can eventually take off too. But he's going to be selling all of this wool. The rich has gotten richer right here. He's a wealthy man, but he's about to figure out that he's getting ready to get a whole lot wealthier. All right, here we go. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman. She's a looker. And, it's probably because Nabal was so rich. Not that she was a gold digger. All right? It's just this. Hear it out. It's just that he was able to pay the dowry above and beyond. So he could basically, because he was so wealthy at this particular time, he could pick any woman he wanted to. So he picked not only this beautiful woman, but she was intelligent. We're going to find out more about that next week. But her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. He was a Calebite, meaning that he came from the descendants of Caleb. Remember Caleb and Joshua in Numbers 14? He came from the descendants of Caleb. Nabal's name in the Hebrew, it's just really neat. It means, the root word means heavy. Meaning this, he was hard to deal with. It was a burden to deal with him. All right? Now, a neat thing to realize lately, after this episode with David, and we're going to find out why, his name actually becomes something different. He keeps the same name, but to the Hebrews, his name means fool. It's like, okay, let me give you an example. It's like when you would say something like, man, don't be Nabalin all up around in here. Don't be acting on the ball. All right? It became a slang term to the Israelites. If you were acting foolish, you were acting like Nabal. We're going to find out why here in just a minute. But Nabal he is shearing sheep. He's got this beautiful wife that's Abigail. And then the story goes on. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. David knows exactly what's going on, all right? The rich is getting richer, and David's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Since Nabal he's going to be shearing these sheep. He's going to be slaughtering some of these sheep. There's going to be a big party because he's going to find out just how wealthy he's become. And so that's always in the ancient times, that's always a big course of celebration. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. So say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. This is an ancient greeting. That it basically means this: we come in peace. All right, we come in peace. So he sent these men. They're shearing sheep. He goes, Nabal's getting ready. He's going to be in a great mood because he's becoming so much more wealthier. And here's the deal. And here's why David sent the 10 men. Or we'll go through it. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, meaning that as David's men, when they were out in the wilderness, Nabal's shepherds and all of his flocks were there grazing too. He says, when your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them. And the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Meaning that when David's men were around, any bandits or any rogues, anybody that would want to steal some sheep and stuff, they didn't dare cross David's men because these men were fierce warriors and they would fight you tooth and nail, and you just didn't want to mess with David or his men. So people knew better. So Nabal, by kind of cozying up to David's men, it allowed an extra layer of protection for his shepherds that were watching his flock. They didn't have to worry about a lot of other things that other shepherds had to worry about, because you had all of David's men, all of these 600 men that were camping in and around you. So David's like, part of the reason you've got what you got, and that you're enjoying such vast wealth, and that you're going to make so much more money this time around, part of the reason is because you were kind of cozying up to us, but it's okay. We didn't mistreat any of your shepherds. I told my men to not even steal anything, meaning don't grab a sheep and let's have a barbecue. All right? I told them to not do any of these things. So listen, the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of yours was missing. All right? Ask your own servants, David says. They will tell you. Therefore, be favorable toward my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find, whatever you got laying around, whatever kind of scraps, if you feel generous at the time, then why don't you just give us whatever? Seems like a pretty reasonable proposition. When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then these three little words. Then they waited. All right, now what's important about these three words is this. In ancient times, even in the Mideast today, hospitality is a huge thing. It's a big, big thing about entertaining guests, right? Because you don't know who you're entertaining sometimes. So it's really big. But he made them wait. We don't know how long, probably for days, for a response. It would be the equivalent of this. We were neighbors, and you came by my house. You said, Pastor Scott, I need a cup of sugar. And I go, okay, hey, wait right here. And I shut the door. And then a day later, I came back. And surprisingly, you were gone. Because after about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, some of you got real long patience, you'd make it about 11 minutes, right? You'd be like, forget this, man. And you'd walk home and you go, I'll tell you what, if I ever see that pastor again, going back to his church, I'll tell you how much. That's how you would feel slighted, wouldn't you? But David's men, they knew we're not going back to David without a response. All right, so they waited. Now, let me tell you something this while David's men are waiting and while we're waiting for Nabal. Let me tell you this. What's interesting at this particular point, and I don't know what your thought process is with David. Most of us, if you've been in church, you kind of think of David like this. You kind of think of David, well, he was a shepherd boy that grew up with, in a big family, and he slayed Goliath, and then he went on to become a king, and he wrote all these pretty psalms, and he played the harp, so that means he was so sensitive. Right? It's really, if you read David's biography, okay, if you read David's biography, he's not. David is a very violent man. Now, this is just his biography. When he lived in the land of the Philistines, he would commonly raid Philistine villages, and he would massacre every single man or woman. And David was a man that was not only very violent, but he was not a man to be trifled with, even by ancient standards. Okay? He's a violent person. He would make William Wallace, anybody know Braveheart, Mel Gibson? Freedom! Right, yeah. He would make William Wallace look like a Boy Scout. There's a real interesting story in Scripture that Saul wants David to prove himself one time. And he says, I want you to go kill 10,000 Philistines. And the proof, some of you know the story, don't you? If you don't, go read it. The proof is you have to bring back a body part of each Philistine you kill. I'm just going to leave it at that. And David did. So David at this time, listen, he's not a person that you want to fool with or that you want to mess around with. David at this particular time, again, he's a violent person. Matter of fact, later on in his story, God won't allow David to build the temple because he has shed so much bloodshed. He wants Solomon to build it because he wants a man that has not shed blood. And so David, he's got a reputation that runs throughout Israel, throughout Philistine, throughout all of Galilee that talks about how violent of a man he is. So Nabal's making this man basically wait. We don't know how long. Then Nabal comes onto the scene and he says this. Nabal answered David's servants and he goes, "Who is this David? Who is he? Who is this son of Jesse?" This tells us right here, he knew exactly who David was because he knew who his dad was. He had heard the stories, but he didn't care. And he goes, "Many servants are breaking away from their masters." Meaning, this guy's just some rude fellow, just some rogue. He's just running off, and now he has the audacity to come up here to me and demand things. And Nabal goes on and says this, why should I take my bread and water and the meat that I have slaughtered for the shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? I don't even know where he's coming from. I don't even know who he is. Who does he think he is? Coming here and demanding things or asking things. Forget him. So here's what happens. David's men turned around, and they went back. And when they were out, they reported, listen, every word. Here's what Nabal said. Here's what he said about your mama. And I don't know he didn't. Oh, yeah, he did. He said he don't even know your name. He barely remember your daddy's name. He thinks you're just some fly-by-night guy that's just broke away from Saul. Can't even be obedient to Saul. Can't even do this. And I don't even know where you're coming from. And then you have the audacity to come here. You see, because as men that are messengers, it was important for them to report every single word. Here's what he said. So you can imagine how this landed. Here's how it landed. David said to the men, "It's okay, y'all. Calm down. Let's just go somewhere else." No, that's not what David said. David said to his men, "Each of you strap on your sword." So they did. And David strapped on his own as well. This is big. About 400 men went up with David while 200 stayed with the supplies. Now look, this is classic overkill. It's getting ready to be classic overkill, right? Think about this. He's going to take 400 men to meet Nabal and a couple of his servants. I mean, it's going to be a massacre of epic proportions, right? I'm not sure, but historians seem to think this was the first time the phrase, "you mess with the bull, you get the horn," was uttered. Because David's strapping on his sword. Now, interesting fact about David's sword. Anybody know where David's sword came from? Goliath. That's exactly right. Give that person a cup of coffee. It came from Goliath. Now, think about this. So when David straps on his sword, that sword, Goliath's sword, is a reminder to him. As opposed to anybody else, listen, it's a reminder to him. You don't have to take matters into your own hands. You don't have to do that. As a matter of fact, the reason you got that sword is because I came through for you. I protected you. I guarded you. I went before you in the battle. I handled this situation with you and Goliath. You remember the 5 stones. You remember the sling. And listen, how did Goliath die? He didn't die from the stones. He died because after David phased him, after David hit him in the head, then David went up, took his sword, and took his head off. Then David kept his sword. So that sword is a reminder to David Don't take matters into your own hands. Let me lead you in all things. But here's the thing. David can't see that right now. Because he's hurt, he's offended, and he's angry. And so all he's saying is this: I'm going to find that dude, and when I do, it's going to be something to pay. Because, David, you can almost hear, you probably don't do this, all right? But you can almost hear the conversation in David's head, can't you? Oh, man, all those nights we walked out after that clown's sheep. All those nights I had my men. My men could have stole him blind. And the only reason he's got everything he's got is because of me. Because, you ever done that? Your boss shafts you, doesn't give you that promotion or doesn't give you that bonus, and you're sitting there thinking, man, the only reason they got that is because of the hard work, because of my accounts, because all the legwork I put in, because all the thinking, all because of my innovative idea, all because of these things. Or they only have all these things because of me. You ever had those conversations in your head? Don't raise your hand. But it's like you build up a head of steam, don't you? Oh, man, and I don't know if you do it, but I sometimes have these imaginary conversations with people right before I'm getting ready to confront them. And I imagine I have a whole audience of people that are pulling for me. And I come up and let me tell you something. And they're like, yeah, you give it to him, Smith. Yeah, let me tell you something else about your mama. Yeah, let me tell you something. Yeah, yeah. And everybody's like, yeah, Smith. Like you're driving down the road, and you're like, I can't wait to get there. Oh, God, when I get there, heads are going to roll, man. And, you're like, in and out of traffic, and people, think you're in an action movie or something because you're like, because you got a head full of stuff. David's like this. And he's getting to this point to where he's like, it's on like Donkey Kong. I've got this sword. I've got these 400 men. There's not going to be a single person left alive when I get there. And then something happens. And we're going to get to that next week. I know, isn't it great? I told y'all that to tell you this, all right, because I want to leave you with 3 questions today. And I want us to resolve this next week. And I want you to see the most unlikeliest hero that pops out of this story. Because here's where the table is set today, okay? You have Nabal, who's returned good for evil, right? David did him good, and now Nabal's returning evil for. And you have David, who's about to return evil for evil, all right? And you and I, we know this, right? That it does no good whatsoever to just break even with somebody because you're just even with somebody that you don't like, or that you're even with somebody that's just difficult. And is that where you want to land? So here's the 3 questions I want to leave you with. Do you want to be even with someone who's difficult or even mean? At the end of the day, when you lay your pillow down, and listen, I understand. I get it. I know what the golden rule is, right? The golden rule is do unto others as you would have them. You know what the iron rule is? Do unto others as you feel like doing unto them. You know what I mean? But the iron rule is do unto others as they have done unto you. But what it does is it just leaves us even with the very person that we find is being extremely difficult. And at the end of the day, is that where you want to lay your head? Something to think about this week. Here's the second one. Wouldn't you rather be ahead than just even? When you leave your interaction with this person, all right, when you break away from them, when it's the end of the day, or when you don't have to deal with them anymore about children, or when you don't have to deal with them anymore about money, or you don't have to deal with them anymore about time, or you don't have to deal with them in a relationship anymore because you've set up boundaries and stuff, how do you want to leave that interaction? Do you want to leave it even with them? to where you can say, oh, I stuck it to them? Or do you want to leave ahead of the game? And then the last one is this. What story do you want to tell? When you repeat this story, like David's story, and you know how you gather around your friends, and you're all sitting around, and you're just talking and eating dinner and stuff, and you're going, I remember this time. I had this boss. Oh, man, dude. Or I remember this time when I was doing. And then how do you want that story to go? How do you want it to go? Because when we think about it and when we deal with it, we want the story to tell a story that for us has a purpose to it beyond just getting even with somebody. Don't we? So when we talk about getting even, or when we talk about getting ahead, here's the last one, and I didn't put this one up, but I just want to present it to you, and I'm going to close, and then we'll stop. What would it look like for you to repay good for evil? Right now in your situation, when you think about that difficult person, what would it look like for you to return good for evil? Because this is the pathway. This is where we have to land with this. If we claim to be followers of Christ, then we have to follow. And Jesus is very clear about situations like this, isn't it? I didn't get a lot of response there. I didn't think I would. Because, listen, this is the times where it's hard. It's hard to be a Christian. Because our first thought is the natural thought of this. Well, they deserve this. They do. The iron rule. I know what the golden rule is. Do unto others as you would have them do. I get it. But somebody needs to put this dude in his place, and I'm just the instrument of God to do it. We think that sometimes, don't we? We have that start thought sometimes. And it's so easy in the moment, isn't it? Because difficult people, if we're not careful, if we're not proactive, they can take a certain measure of control in our lives and they can throw us off balance. And you can't just ignore them and you can't just decide to get even with them. We have to handle it in a way, and I want to handle it in a way where we can be ahead and not behind. So join us next week as we talk about how these stories unfold and the lessons that we can learn about how to deal with difficult people. Join me as we go to the Lord in prayer. Father, in the name of Christ, thank you. Thank you for your great grace and your mercy. Thank you for your love for us. Father, it's hard to talk about stuff like this, and we need courage, we need help when it comes to these things, because we all deal with folks like this. So we not only pray for them, we pray for ourselves in the midst of this, that you would help us, I pray, to be proactive as we start to search our own hearts when it comes to this idea of dealing with people, especially the difficult people, the really difficult people in our lives. Father, we love you and we praise you in the name of Christ. Amen.